everyone, Clio here, and today we're going over my November wrap-up, all the books that I read in the month of November. Now, November is simultaneously a very good month, but also sort of like oopsie type of month, because while I read quite a few things in the month of November, I didn't necessarily read the ones that were on my TBR. But so, in the month of November, I did not film a mid-month wrap-up, and in hindsight, it's a bit stupid because the reason why I didn't do it was the day that I was gonna film, it was like no sun was coming out, and I usually film with natural light because I don't really have good lighting otherwise. But I'm hoping that this lighting is gonna turn out okay, because today was more or less the same situation. So it is actually now 8 o'clock at night. There is no more lights. So I'm hoping that the lighting on this one is okay. Definitely let me know if it's like horrible lighting. And I definitely need to make sure that I have a backup plan, because I remember that it's like this every single December. But so, without further ado, let's just dive into it. In the month of November, as I said, I didn't film a mid-month wrap-up, so we're going to go through all of the books that I read in the month. Now, there are going to be 3 numbers on the screen at all time. The first one is my physical TBR, so the amount of physical books that I still have on my TBR. At the beginning of the month of November, this number was 51. Then you're going to have my credit system, so every sort of like physical book that I reduce off of that TBR earns me a number of credits. If I add on to that TBR, I need to use credits in order to buy these books. At the beginning of the month, I had 19 credits, and then the final number is going to be on there is the amount of books that I read in the month of November. Now, the first thing that I'll say about the month of November is I didn't add any books to that TBR, and I reduced it by 15 books because I unhauled 15 books. So we're going to immediately take 15 books off of there. Now, I'm not going to go over them individually here. I have a video in which I unhaul these particular books. I will link that one up above so that you can go and check them out if you are interested in that. But so, that's a nice reduction to that TBR. I'm very happy with that. And so let's see what else I was able to accomplish in the month of November. The first book that I tackled in the month of November was for Nonfiction November, and that is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walsh. So this is a nonfiction book. It is a memoir in which Jeanette Walsh talks about her childhood. Now, she grew up in a poor household, and her family, her parents were basically these sort of like free-spirited people who really took that all the way. You know, they very much are nonconformist people, so they don't believe in, you know, sticking to the rules of society, in following the rules that society puts down. But they definitely take that to the extreme, in the sense that the health and the sort of like safety of their children often is compromised due to their ideals. And so this book will go over their childhood and will show the positives and the negatives. It will show the deep love that they felt for their parents and these sort of like profound connection that they at times had with their children, or the profound lessons that they taught to their children, while also showing the ways in which these parents actually failed their children, because these children grew up very quickly, and certainly from age like 10 onwards or something like that, sometimes it feels like the children are the parents and the parents are actually the children in terms of the types of decisions that they are making. And so I really enjoyed this one, but it was also like angering. It angered me a whole lot from time to time to see the way that these parents would treat their children, the way that they would not realize how heavily their lifestyle choices impacted their children. But as we see in this book, they don't consider the things that we would consider problematic, or the things that we would consider are missing in their childhoods. These parents don't really see it in that same light, you know. Even at the end of the book, when she as an adult is reflecting back on this story, and she is kind of giving us an insight in her current relationship with her parents, you can see that her parents are basically living off of the streets. They're living out of garbage cans, but they also still hold on to the fact that that is all they need. They don't need more. They don't want more. They are living the perfect life. They are living the life that they want to lead. So it was a very interesting book. I definitely highly recommend it. I'm already going about this in the wrong order, because actually the first book that I finished this month was The Other Man by Farhad J. Dadiburjor. Sorry about that pronunciation. I'm sure that that was probably a whole butchering of that name. But so this was an R copy that I was assigned. It came out in the month of October, around the midway point of the month of October. This is an Indian romance story. It's a male-male romance story. Our protagonist, Ved, is basically the son of a very successful man. His father is basically the owner of a successful business, and he has every intention of following in his footsteps, or mainly he believes that that is his duty, that is what is expected of him. Likewise, he's also kind of struggling with the expectations that his mother is putting on him to find the right girl and get married. Now, one problem in that scenario is the fact that he actually is not attracted to women. However, he has not told anyone in his family of this. So he is secretly going to gay bars, having casual relationships. However, his mother very much keeps on setting him up on these dates in order to help him find the perfect woman. And on one of these dates, he really gets along very well with the woman that he is dating at that point in time. And when his mother asks him about how the date went, he cannot really figure out a way to easily put her down. And as a result, he ends up finding himself engaged to this woman. Now, I very much enjoyed The Other Man. I think it is a very wholesome story. It's a lovely story. The only thing that personally made it a little bit difficult to get through was the amount of lying that takes place within this one. I mean, it happens a whole lot in romance, I feel. There are a lot of romance novels and other novels that rely on lying as a plot point, and so because he is fearful of the reaction that his parents or the people around him will have if he comes out, especially as it is a criminal act to be gay in India at that point in time. So clearly he has these fears and reservations, and so the reason why he's lying is because he's afraid to tell the truth. So there is definitely a clear understanding to why he's lying, but you can just feel the train wreck coming, and so a whole lot of the time I was just frustrated with him. I was just like, just tell them, just let people know who you really are, just let them see that side of you, because you are just making things so much worse for yourself in the long run. There is a male-male romance in here, as I said. I really enjoyed the male-male romance a whole lot, and so yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I enjoyed the fact as well that this is an Indian setting. It is also written by an Indian author working in India, so that's also something that we don't get that often. You know, a whole lot of the romance publications are US, UK based. Authors are usually US, UK, Canada, English-speaking world, maybe Europe. So I'm very happy that I stumbled upon this one, and definitely would say that if you enjoy romance, for example, that this one is also one that you should be checking out. The next thing that I did in the month of November was reread Starsight by Sanderson in order to prepare for the release of Cytonic. This is a reread, so I won't linger on this. I'll talk a little bit more about it when I dive into my explanation for Cytonic, I guess. But so I very much enjoyed this reread, knowing some of the problems I had with it the first time around. It was actually more enjoyable upon rereads. This is also the month of some random books that I just picked up, mainly because I needed audiobooks to listen to when I was cooking. And so this one is one of those, and that is My Body by Emily Ratashkovsky, I think. Ratashkovsky, yes. Basically, the reason why this one caught my attention was I was kind of checking out the non-fiction section of Script, and this book has been popping up in a lot of sponsored videos about books that matter recently, and so it's an essay collection about relationship that women have to their bodies. Now, I did not know who Emily Ratashkovsky was before I started the book, but so she is actually a model, and so the concept of a woman's relationship to her body is even more complex in her case, because she's also actively commodifying her body. And so in a lot of cases in these essays, she will also be referring to that interesting dynamic of her using her body to make money, but at the same time also the sort of situations in which she finds that, you know, she doesn't have control over the way that her body is presented or the way that her body is used. As with most essay collections, I mean, this is the third one I read, for example, I think, or the second one maybe even only. There are strong pieces, there are less strong pieces. So I feel like there definitely are a few pieces that I really enjoyed true and true. I definitely think the Blurred Lines one was a very strong one, and there's another one around the beginning that I thought was really strong in that it's something that, you know, every woman can relate to. It was talking more about like general relationship that women had to their body, less to the model side of things. But I do feel like as the collection progresses, the pieces got less and less strong, or, you know, we were just repeating things that we had already basically touched upon in other essays. So I did find it interesting to read through this one, and it was easy to listen to as well. It wasn't a chore at all, but as a whole it's not necessarily fully satisfactory. Then I sadly also DNF'd the book. So I DNF'd A Winter's Promise by Christelle Davos. This is the French edition, so this is Les Fiancés de l'Hiver. So this is an originally French fantasy series. It has 4 books out. I think that that's the totality of the series, and the 4th book just got translated into English, so all of them are out in that case. But so in this story we have our protagonist Ophélie, who has the power to read the history of objects, and she can also walk through mirrors. Now at the beginning of this story, she is promised away to somebody who lives on a different sphere, on a place on this planet where she has never been to, because basically Earth has kind of shattered into these different spheres. And these spheres are very sort of like isolated places, so not a whole lot of people are traveling in between these places. So basically she needs to leave behind everybody she's ever known to go and marry some guy who she's never met. And when she then meets her intended, he's also really a horrible guy who treats her horribly, or not even treats her horribly, he just makes it very clear that he has no interest in her whatsoever, that he just wants the political match to happen. Now, I originally struggled with this one because of the French, because I have high school level French, so it's not like I can easily make my way through a French novel like this. So it was taking me more time to try and get through it, but I was definitely, I was eager to get it done. I really wanted to read it in the original French, but I did definitely take more time with it. But as I got further into it, I got more sucked into the narrative flow and things like that. It just became more easy. I was also always listening to the English audiobook after I had read a few chapters in French to make sure that I was still following correctly to what was actually happening in the story. But I must say that I took a little break from it, like a 2-day break of it at some point when I was in the midway section of it, when I had just reached, I'd concluded part 1. I took 2 days off to read Starsight, and then I started this one again. I started part 2, and it was just such a struggle to get through. And I don't necessarily think that if I hadn't taken those 2 days off that it wouldn't have been the case. I just feel like it has a way too slow of a pace, and that some of the things that I was excited about with this premise then just weren't really the focus of this story. I was really excited about Ophélie and her powers, about the idea of her being able to read the history of objects, about her being able to travel through mirrors. And yes, the traveling through mirrors bit we used to some extent, but also very limited. I think she traveled through mirrors 3 times maybe in the 300 pages that I've read, and she didn't use her powers to read objects anymore when she wasn't in her home sphere anymore, for example. So I was expecting more of that into the story, and that's not necessarily to say that because of that I don't like it, but because those things weren't there, and the things that were there were developing way too slowly for my liking, I just ended up really struggling with it. And at some point I just had to say, you know what, I actually can't be bothered. I actually don't care what happens now. And so why would I get through another 200 pages in this book just to be able to finish it? That was also the last physical book that I tackled in the month of November, so we're making no further progress on the TBR for the remainder of the month. But I am very happy with the progress that I ended up making this month. As you can see, it dwindled down by quite a lot, of course, because of an on-haul. But basically, I just went through that list again to see, do I actually really still care about these books or not? Because if not, why am I still putting myself through them? But so, remainder of the month. I'll first talk about another nonfiction that I read. So third nonfiction in the month of November for Nonfiction November. So I ended up surprisingly doing well for Nonfiction November. But so that is Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary Resilient Disabled Body by Rebecca Tausig. So this is a book that I've been meaning to get to for a very long time. I mean, I've seen this around and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds very interesting, but because of my TBR0 project I wasn't going to buy it, for example. And so it's also when I was looking for an audiobook to listen to on Script when I was cooking that I saw that Script actually has the audiobook for it. So this is a memoir by a disabled person, by somebody who is in a wheelchair from an early age onward, and so it talks about some of the challenges that she's had to face in life because of ableism in the people around her. And so, I really enjoyed this one. I think it's a very interesting one. I think a whole lot of people who are able-bodied definitely should be trying to read a book like this, for example, to be able to see what exactly ableism is, why we say that ableism is all around, to be able to kind of dismantle ableism a little bit or kind of understand what we're talking about when we're talking about ableism. Because I think from an outside perspective and even from an inside perspective, there's so much ingrained, inherent ableism that you sometimes aren't able to really dive out of that, you're not able to really perceive it unless it's really pointed out to you in the way that it is within this book. And so definitely for able-bodied people, I think it would be very interesting to read this book and kind of think about some of the ways that they might respond in situations that are being brought up within this book, for example. And as a disabled person myself, this was also very interesting for me to read. I mean, I'm always down to read more experiences of other disabled people, and her experience, of course, is very different from mine because I have an invisible disability, so I don't have to deal with automatic ableism from the people around me. People just assume that I'm able-bodied, whereas she has a very visible disability. Of course, she is using a wheelchair. She will always immediately be noticed as that disabled person. And so that already creates very different experiences. But at the same time, there's also a whole lot of things that I can relate to from my experience that touch upon a sort of like shared disabled experience. And while it's not necessarily a hugely educational piece about, you know, the disability framework, so to speak, you know, about the theory surrounding disability or about, you know, the legislation about disability and things like that, she does touch upon a whole lot of those things. And she kind of introduces like just enough of that for people who don't really have any sort of understanding of disability studies. But, you know, if you are somebody who has read like a whole lot on disability, then this is more to be enjoyed because of the perspective of the author and because of her life experiences than because of what it might teach you about disability, for example. But I highly enjoyed this one, thought it was very like page turning. I listened to it, but I think I listened to it in like 2 sittings or something like that because I really did enjoy it a whole lot and did love the flow of the story as well. So yeah, highly recommend that one. And then for the remainder of the month, basically I just finished the Skyward projects. So I read the 2 novellas in between Starsight and Cytonic. So I read Sunreach and Redawn, and then I finished by reading Cytonic when it was released at the end of the month. So concerning the novellas, now a whole lot of people seem to indicate that you need to read them before Cytonic. I'm actually of the opinion that you don't necessarily need to. I don't think that there's any information in there that is needed for Cytonic. There's a whole lot of information in there, don't get me wrong. I just don't think that Cytonic does anything with that information that you're given in those novellas. So in my opinion, you could read them after probably. But at the same time, I also think that your enjoyment of Cytonic will go up if you've read the novellas first. Because basically the novellas take place at the same time of Cytonic. And you kind of get an understanding of what other characters are doing that aren't in Cytonic. So basically, as a result, in Cytonic, you might miss those characters. And if you have the background knowledge of what happened in the novellas with them, then it's just like interesting to see. Because you can kind of from time to time see like, oh, okay, this is this moment in those novellas, for example. So I would say go for it. They are pretty short. I mean, it's a Brandon Sanderson novella. It's still like 200 pages each. But they are pretty fast reads. I enjoyed the first novella more or less. I don't know, I think I cried with the second one and not with the first one. For both of these, I will say they're like enjoyable, but that's about it. I enjoyed reading from Evan's perspective in the first one, in Sunreach, because, you know, she's one of these characters that is an essential part of Skyward Flight, but we haven't really gotten to know much about her. So it was interesting to read from her perspective and to find more about her. There's also a whole lot of focus on like doomslug type creatures within that story, which was very wholesome, very fun. So I enjoyed that a whole lot. And then the second one, Redawn, was interesting because of the world building a whole lot more, I think, than the first one. And as I said, towards the ending there, I did cry a little bit because of something that happens there. So I did enjoy the novellas, but they're not earth-shattering or anything like that. But they hold up, they're fine. But then we get to Cytonic, and this is the big disappointment for me, because I did not really like Cytonic. I mean, it was okay. That's my conclusion there. So I'm giving it 2 stars on Goodreads, which is basically the review that I give for fine. I did not hate this book. I did not dislike this book, but I also did not care that much about this book. So Cytonic, So what I was going to do was talk about Skyward when I was talking about Cytonic. So basically Cytonic is the third release in the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. This is a YA sci-fi series in which we're following Spensa, who basically all of her life she has been branded as sort of coward because her father, who used to be the sort of like role model in society, he was a fighter pilot, he basically abandoned ship, so to speak, in one of these sort of like crucial battles in their history. He died in the incident, he was branded a coward, and his family was branded cowards by association, but Spensa really wants to follow in his footsteps and prove everybody wrong, prove that she isn't a coward, her father wasn't a coward, but the powers to be aren't really eager to see her go down that direction and kind of don't want to see her end up in a fighter pilot at any point in time. Now, I really enjoyed Skyward. Skyward is amazing. I give Skyward 5 stars, and as I said, Starsight, upon reread, I enjoyed it more than the first time, but the first time I already enjoyed it a whole lot. But with Cytonic, I did not have this experience. And like initially I was like, maybe it's because I'm listening to the audiobook, but I cannot believe that it's because of the audiobook that would be the entire reason why I felt like indifferent towards Cytonic, whereas I've really been enjoying the previous books within this series. So I will definitely say that in terms of the audiobook, I didn't particularly enjoy the voice that they give to Mbot, because they kind of give her like a Scottish accent, and I mean it's a robot. I did not really interpret Mbot that way. I also made Mbot way more sarcastic in my brain, so my interpretation of the Mbot humor was very different than the Mbot humor that is portrayed that way in the audiobook. So with that already was a little bit of a strike against it, but I don't know, I just like, this was my problem with Skyward. This was my problem with Starsight to begin with, is the fact that we only have Spensa. And so for people who are worried about that for Cytonic, yes, you once again only have Spensa. So I would have actually really preferred for him to find a way to integrate the rest of Skyward Flight into this story rather than give them separate novellas. But leaving that aside, I also just don't think that the story works as well as his stories usually work. I felt like they were less like breadcrumbs that like in the end all fall together into one big plot, or at least all of the breadcrumbs I felt were like super like clear, like it wasn't, or at least like the breadcrumbs either weren't interesting enough. Some of the things that are hinted at early on, I wasn't really that eager to find out what the answer was, or what the mystery was surrounding it. And then a lot of that I figured out halfway through as well. And that's not necessarily to say that doesn't ever happen in other Sanderson books, but in other Sanderson books I'm still enjoying it despite those things. But those are definitely things that I enjoy a whole lot about Sanderson books, is the way that they're built and the building blocks that are in the story, or the way that he builds certain expectations and then plays with those expectations. And none of that was happening within this book, I feel. And aside from that, I just didn't feel much stakes to this one at all. And there should be stakes, but for some reason I did not feel there were any. Maybe because this story is set on a very different location than the previous two, for example. And so it's kind of an out of sight, out of mind type of situation. I don't know, but I didn't feel like there was great character work within this one. And the characters that were introduced to within this one, I kind of felt were just like bland, meh. This is potentially also because Spensa herself didn't really want to get close to these people. She didn't want to get attached to any of these people. However, that's of course a choice then that the author made, and that I feel was to the detriment of this. In terms of character development, yes, there are things that take place within this story, but nothing major, which is also kind of true for Starsight. But in Starsight, world building wise, it compensated for a whole lot. And thematically, it compensated for a whole lot. Whereas in this one, either the world building and the thematic of this one just didn't suit me. And that's the reason why this didn't compensate for me. But I just felt like this was just a story that wasn't well crafted, wasn't well thought through, and could have just as easily been left out of the entire storyline. Because what did we accomplish by having this book in there? Not a whole lot. And actually there was only one moment in this book in which I felt really engaged, in which I was really thinking like, oh, what? Oh no, is that going to happen? And in which I was kind of like bracing myself for the emotional impact of something to happen. And then, you know, it didn't deliver that the way that I would have liked to. And as a result, I kind of build emotions, and then that emotional build kind of deflated because I was, okay. So yeah, I didn't dislike this book because I also don't think like this is a rant. This is just basically me saying that there wasn't anything that really captured my attention or that saved this book for me. So in the end, I just kept on listening to it and kept on experiencing the story, but at no point in time did I feel an emotional connection to what was happening, nor did I feel an emotional connection to these characters that I had grown to love. I feel like in book 1 I went on such a journey with Spencer where I disliked Spencer immensely at the beginning, and I grew to love her so much throughout that first book. And then now, this entire book, I kind of felt quite indifferent towards Spencer in the end. Same goes for Embot. Embot I loved from the beginning. He has never disappointed me, but in this particular story, he couldn't save it. And that's potentially due to the audiobook, because I do think that there was some interesting things being done with Embot. The way in which we play with Embot is interesting intellectually. Like if I think about it, I think that is interesting, but in execution I did not think that was interesting. So we're gonna leave it at that. I did not enjoy Cytonic, and I am very disappointed that I didn't. So we'll just have to see what ends up happening in December. At the end of the month, the third novella is coming out. I will be reading it. But yeah, I hope the fourth book kind of saves this series for me. And if not, I would say just read Skyward and don't continue. But yeah, we'll wait until the fourth book is out before I make any type of statement like that. But so, that was my reading in the month of November. All in all, I got quite some books read. And as I said, sort of like midway through this video, I reduced my TBR by quite a lot because of that unhaul. And so it's looking a lot better for December. But mind you, there's also the potential for quite a lot of books to arrive in the month of December. I think I have the potential for 6 more books to be added to it, which would still mean that I manage my goal. My end of year goal is to get this number under 40. So we're there at the moment. And so I'm hoping to be able to keep it like that. But ideally I would get it like to 36 or something like that. Ending the year on 36 or lower would be an even better goal. But of course, my original goal of under 40 is the main one. If I manage that and I don't get under 36, that's still perfectly fine. That is what I intended to do at the beginning of the year. So yeah, if you've read any of these books, definitely let me know down below. Definitely let me know as well how your month went. Did you have a good one or like a whoopsie one, the way that I kind of had? And yeah, let me know if you plan to read Cytonic, and I hope I didn't scare you away from reading it. I definitely have seen a whole lot of people still give it, for example, 4 or 5 stars, so it does work very well for certain people, just not for me, sadly. But so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. See you guys for a future one. Bye!